I walked into the briefing room, and the SEAL Admiral smirked. "What's your call sign, Princess?" The SEAL Admiral was smirking when I walked into the briefing room. "What's your call sign, Princess?" The question hung in the air, followed by a wave of laughter from the other men. I let the sound die down before I answered, my voice calm and clear. "Reaper Zero." The smirk vanished from the Admiral's face, replaced by a pale shock. He knew the name. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Sandra Kane. I'm 32 years old, and I earned that call sign in a Kandahar storm so bad that everyone else said the mission was impossible. For years, I operated under the belief that my performance would speak for itself. I put in more hours, flew more dangerous missions, and kept my mouth shut while others claimed credit. I endured the quiet disrespect, but when a SEAL Admiral tried to humiliate me in front of 40 fellow officers, calling me a princess as if I were just playing dress-up, I gave him my call sign. The moment he understood its meaning, the entire room went still. Have you ever been so profoundly underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? If you've ever had to fight for your place against a tide of doubt, you'll know what happened next. I come from a military family, the kind where discipline was served with breakfast. My dad, a Navy mechanic, had me disassembling engines before I had a driver's license. My mom used to say I knew how to salute before I could form a full sentence. Our home was a constant mix of motor oil and freshly pressed uniforms. Dinner conversations weren't about school or friends, they were about deployment schedules and maintenance checks. I learned young that precision was everything, that taking shortcuts could cost lives, and that respect wasn't given. It was earned through action. By 17, I was pushing myself harder than recruits twice my age. I'd run 5 miles before the sun came up, spend my weekends on the firing range, and devour flight manuals like they were novels. My friends called me obsessed, and maybe they were right. But for me, the Navy wasn't just a career choice. It was my inheritance. My grandfather served in Vietnam, and my father dedicated 20 years to keeping jets in the sky. It was the family business, and I was born to do it. Right after flight school, I joined the Special Operations Aviation Unit, the quiet professionals who worked in the shadows alongside the SEALs. My specialty was insertion and extraction, getting teams into impossible places and pulling them out, regardless of the weather, the terrain, or the firefight. We flew low and fast, skimming landscapes that would make a commercial pilot vomit. We'd touch down in locations that didn't exist on any map, retrieve men whose names we'd never learn, and vanish back into the night. It was high-stakes work that demanded a level of focus and a steadiness of nerve that most people simply don't possess. You don't get a call sign like Reaper Zero in a flight simulator. I earned mine on a night in Kandahar when a storm had grounded every other pilot on the base. The wind wasn't just blowing. It felt like it was trying to rip the world apart. Visibility at our forward operating base was practically non-existent, and 12 miles out, a SEAL team was pinned down taking casualties. Command had already made their decision. They were writing them off. Too risky, they said. The weather's a no-go. We'll attempt extraction at dawn. But everyone in that room knew dawn meant body bags. I volunteered. My co-pilot, a steady hand named Alvarez, didn't even blink. We did our pre-flight checks in a driving, horizontal rain, strapped ourselves in, and lifted off into conditions that shredded every safety protocol in the book. The flight out was a vision of hell. We were battered by wind shear that almost sent us into a spiral twice. With zero visibility, we navigated purely by instruments and gut instinct. When we finally located the team, they were nearly surrounded, taking fire from 3 directions and down to their last few magazines of ammunition. We came in hot, rotors screaming, and I held our position steady while they loaded the wounded. Tracers from enemy fire painted the darkness around us, and I felt the sickening punch of rounds tearing through the fuselage. Through it all, Alvarez called out damage reports, his voice never wavering. We got every single one of them out. The flight back was even worse. We were overloaded, losing hydraulic pressure, and the engine temperature was redlining. I babied that helicopter home with nothing but discipline and pure stubbornness, setting her down hard on the tarmac. The mechanic started yelling about the damage before the rotors even stopped spinning. An hour later, the SEAL team leader, a master chief with a face like carved granite, found me in the hangar. He didn't say much. He just gripped my hand and said, "From now on, you're Reaper Zero." The name stuck. I built my career on quiet competence. The men I worked with respected me because I never demanded it, I just did the job. I was the first to arrive and the last to leave, and I never offered excuses. I took the missions that other pilots refused. I immersed myself in tactical studies until I could anticipate enemy movements better than the intel analysts. I learned every inch of my aircraft, performing maintenance myself to know every system, every vibration, every sound that signaled trouble. Skill was my currency and I never wasted it. But the higher I climbed in rank, the louder the background noise became. Command politics, clashing egos, and the unspoken rule that a woman in this world had to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. I sat through meetings where my suggestions were ignored, only to be praised when a male officer repeated them 5 minutes later. My evaluations would commend my attention to detail, but raise concerns about my command presence, a coded way of saying I was good for a woman, but not just good. I learned to navigate this landscape by staying professional, documenting everything, and letting my mission results speak for me. The mission, I told myself, always came before my pride. When we were taking fire, the men I flew didn't care about my gender. They cared that I could land a bird in a hot zone without flinching, that I understood their tactics as well as they did, and that I would fly through hell itself to bring them home. That was all that mattered. Or so I thought. I'd constructed walls around the constant, low-grade disrespect, compartmentalizing it as the price of admission into a man's world. Chief Warrant Officer Miller, our senior flight mechanic, became a kind of mentor. He was old-school Navy through and through, gruff, covered in tattoos, with 40 years of service and absolutely no tolerance for incompetence. He treated me no differently than anyone else, which meant he held me to an impossibly high standard and was brutally honest when I fell short. If I screwed up, he let me know. If I did good work, he'd offer a grunt of approval and move on. That simple equity was worth more to me than any formal commendation. "You're solid, Kane," he told me once as we were doing post-flight checks, our hands caked in grease. "Don't let the noise get to you. Just keep flying." I took his advice to heart. I put my head down, focused on my work, and did my best to ignore the chatter. The jokes about whether I could handle the physical demands. The whispers about whether I'd received preferential treatment. And the nickname some of the new guys used when they thought I was out of earshot, Princess. I let it all slide. We were in the military. A certain amount of teasing was expected. I'd heard worse and I'd certainly survived worse. Looking back, though, I have to wonder if my silence was a sign of strength or a form of surrender. By not confronting it, did I give them permission to continue? Did the walls I built to protect myself actually end up making me smaller? I believed that my loyalty to the mission meant I had to accept disrespect as part of the job. But competence and respect should never be mutually exclusive, and the day I finally understood that, everything was about to change. The first warning sign was disguised as a joke. "You sure you can handle night ops, ma'am? That storm might mess up your mascara." The comment came from a new SEAL lieutenant, fresh out of Coronado and still mistaking bravado for competence. It was followed by a chorus of chuckles in the ready room. I brushed it off. We were soldiers. Ribbing was part of the culture. But this time the laughter felt different. It had a sharper edge. Slowly things began to shift. My calls would be overlooked in joint briefings. My mission reports were scrutinized twice as heavily as anyone else's. I'd submit flight plans only to have them sent back with insulting questions like, "Are you certain about these fuel calculations?" from analysts who had never spent a second in a cockpit. Meanwhile, identical plans from my male counterparts sailed right through. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one small enough to seem insignificant, but collectively, they were a heavy weight designed to slow me down. 6 months into my posting, a new commander, Admiral Nathan Cole, took charge of the Joint Task Force. His reputation preceded him. Charismatic, loud, and brimming with the kind of swagger that commanded loyalty through sheer force of personality. His teams revered him. He ran his briefings like a football coach, full of motivational speeches and backslapping camaraderie. He had an infectious energy, but something about his style put me on edge. He would shake the hand of every man in the room but look right past me as if I were part of the wall. When male officers spoke, he'd make direct eye contact, but when I gave my updates, he'd check his watch. He called me princess during debriefs and sweetheart. When I questioned his tactics, never my rank, never my name. It was a constant stream of diminutives that reduced me from a decorated pilot to a little girl in a costume. Princess here thinks we should adjust the extraction timeline, he once announced in a planning session. The smile on his face didn't hide the condescension. The other officers chuckled. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my face a mask of professional calm. Let your performance do the talking, I told myself. But there was a deeper undercurrent, something closer to resentment. He would sometimes watch me during mission debriefs, and when I presented my analysis, he'd interrupt with stories about how the SEALs used to do things, implying that pilots should just fly and leave the strategy to the men on the ground. I started asking around. My co-pilot Alvarez had heard some rumors. Word is, Cole lost 2 men on a failed extraction years ago. He told me one night in the hangar. Bad weather, heavy enemy contact, and the pilot couldn't hold position. The team had to pull out on foot. 2 of them didn't make it. The mission logs were heavily redacted, but the circumstances sounded eerily familiar, just like the high-risk ops I specialized in. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Alvarez shrugged. He's been weird about aviation support ever since. Doesn't trust pilots. He trailed off, but I finished his sentence. Especially not women. He nodded. It explained some things. If Cole had spent years blaming a pilot for the loss of his men, then my very presence, my success in the exact scenarios that had defeated him, must have felt like a personal insult. I represented everything he couldn't control. This understanding, however, didn't make the disrespect any easier to bear. During a training exercise in the Nevada desert, I executed a flawless extraction under simulated fire. It was a textbook operation. In the debrief, Cole spent 15 minutes tearing apart my approach angle, questioning whether I'd put the team at unnecessary risk. With respect, sir, I said, my voice level, speed was the priority. The scenario demanded rapid extraction. Caution would have meant casualties. He shot back. Scenarios aren't reality, princess. You can't just fly in like some action hero. The room fell silent. I could have argued. I could have pointed out that my scenarios had involved real bullets and that my call sign wasn't a joke. But I knew that would only confirm his biases, that I was emotional and defensive. Understood, sir, I said instead. He smiled victorious. I left that briefing filled with a doubt I hadn't felt in years. Not in my skills, but in whether competence would ever be enough. I had spent my entire career believing that if I just worked hard enough, the respect would follow. But looking at Admiral Cole, I realized I might have been wrong. For some people, no matter what I accomplished, I would always just be a princess. It happened on a Tuesday during a joint training brief in Norfolk. The room was packed with about 40 people. Officers, analysts, top brass, all seated in neat rows facing a projector. It was a standard professional development session. I arrived early, my uniform immaculate, ready to discuss new flight protocols. Admiral Cole was already at the front, leaning against a table with his arms crossed and that familiar smirk on his face, holding court with a group of SEAL officers. Their laughter filled the room with an easy camaraderie. I found a seat, took out my notepad and went over my notes. The briefing began, and after some routine updates we moved to introductions. When my turn came, I stood. Lieutenant Commander Sandra Kane, Special Operations Aviation. Before I could finish, Cole's voice cut through the room like a blade. Hold on, he said, pushing himself off the table. The room went quiet. Before we get started, what's your call sign, princess? Laughter rippled through the room. Not everyone, but enough. It was the kind of laughter that tightens your throat, the kind that lets you know you're the punchline. I felt a flush of heat rise in my face, but I held my expression steady. This was a test. With Cole, everything was a test. He thought he was being clever, putting me in my place in front of senior command. I let the laughter die out completely. Then, in a voice that was clear and carried to every corner of the room, I said, Reaper 0. The sound stopped instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. The Admiral froze. The color drained from his face, and his smirk evaporated, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He started to say something, but the words wouldn't come, because Reaper 0 wasn't just a name. It was a classified legend. It was the call sign of the pilot who had extracted SEAL Team 9 from Helmand Ridge, under heavy fire, after command had already written them off. It was the mission that every special operator studied in advanced tactical training, an operation logged under the simple designation, Unknown Female Operator. It was the night the impossible had been defeated by a pilot who refused to believe that some men were expendable. I watched the realization dawn on him. I saw the exact moment the anonymous hero from the classified gun camera footage became the woman he had been belittling for months. The men he had lost years ago had been operating in the same province. Different operation, same impossible conditions. The only difference was that their pilot hadn't made it through the storm. I had. In front of everyone, he had just mocked the very person who had succeeded where his own operation had failed. The silence in the room was absolute. Captain Lawson, a senior intelligence officer, leaned forward, his eyes wide with recognition. He had processed the after-action reports from that mission. He knew exactly who Reaper Zero was. Commander Reeves was staring at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. In a way he was. "The Hellman Ridge extraction," Lawson said, his voice a low murmur. "That was you." It wasn't a question. I gave a single nod. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the back. Admiral Cole still hadn't moved. His face was a stricken gray mask. "I didn't," he stammered. "The reports never." "The reports were classified, sir," I stated evenly. "Names redacted for operational security. It's standard procedure." The weight of 40 pairs of eyes was on me, every person in that room reevaluating, recalculating everything they thought they knew. The quiet pilot who never made waves was suddenly the legend from the grainy cockpit videos. Commander Reeves cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "Perhaps we should continue with the briefing." But it was too late. This wasn't a moment you just moved past. This was a revelation. Admiral Cole finally found his voice. "Commander Kane, Lieutenant Commander," I corrected him quietly. "And we should continue with the briefing, sir." I sat down. The briefing did continue, but no one was listening. I could feel the whispers starting, the pressure building. By lunch, the story would be all over the base. Admiral Cole, the charismatic leader, had just publicly humiliated himself by mocking a pilot whose legend dwarfed his own reputation. He had revealed, in the most spectacular way possible, that his prejudice had blinded him to the competence right in front of him. I sat through the rest of the meeting taking notes, asking questions, acting as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The man who had spent months trying to diminish me now couldn't even look in my direction. When it was finally over, I gathered my things. Officers moved out of my way, some nodding with a newfound respect, others just staring. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard Captain Lawson's voice behind me, pitched low but carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "She's that Reaper. The one from the ridge." Holy hell. The story spread like wildfire. By that evening, it was common knowledge on the base. By the next morning, it had reached 3 other commands. The whispers followed me everywhere. "She's the one from the ridge. I saw that footage in training. Command wrote those guys off for dead. She brought them all home." For years, I had earned respect one mission at a time. Now suddenly I had it in abundance, immediate, overwhelming, and unquestioned. But it felt hollow. It wasn't for the work I did every day. It was born from their shock and guilt. The younger officers treated me with a new, careful formality. Senior officers who had once ignored me now went out of their way to be overly respectful, a clear sign they knew they had messed up. I hated it. It proved that my competence had never been the issue. 1,000 perfect missions hadn't mattered as much as one dramatic reveal. The respect had always been available. They just hadn't thought I was worthy of it until my legend became too big to ignore. A few nights later, Alvarez found me in the hangar. I was running my hand over a patched bullet hole on the fuselage of my bird. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." I managed a small smile. "I'm great at lying. I've been lying about being fine for years." He sat down beside me. "Everyone's talking," he said. "They're calling you a legend." "I'm not a legend. I'm just a pilot who did her job." "That's not what the reports say," he countered. Lawson pulled the unclassified summaries. 0 visibility, sustained enemy fire, multiple mechanical failures. "You made 3 trips, Kane. 3. You got everyone out, including 2 guys who were bleeding out. The medic said 15 minutes later, and they'd have been gone. I remembered the night only in flashes, the scream of the rotors, the tracers cutting through the dark, the absolute certainty that we weren't going to make it, and the stubborn refusal to accept that as fact. I did what anyone would have done, I said. No, he replied. You did what no one else could do. There's a difference. We sat in silence for a moment. You know what bothers me most about all this? He finally asked. That they needed the call sign. That all your work, day in and day out, wasn't enough. That it took some classified story to make them see what was right in front of them the whole time. He had voiced the exact thought that had been haunting me. I had trained them to disrespect me by accepting it. Chief Miller found me in the hangar the next night, holding 2 cups of coffee. You're hiding, he said, handing one to me. I'm working. You're hiding, he repeated. Don't blame you. It's a circus out there. For years, I said. I thought if I just did good work that would be enough. Turns out, it took a public spectacle for them to give me the respect I should have had all along. What does that say? Miller took a seat on a toolbox. Says people are stupid. They believe what's easy until reality smacks them in the face. But listen, Kane. You always had my respect. You had the respect of everyone who actually works with you, the guys who fly with you, maintain your bird, and trust you to bring them home. We knew. The ones who didn't, they weren't paying attention. Cole wasn't paying attention, I said. Cole was paying attention to all the wrong things. That's his problem, not yours. But it was my problem too. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about reclaiming my own story. The call sign was just a name, but the work behind it, the hundreds of missions, the countless hours of training, the unwavering precision, that was me. I couldn't control how others saw me, but I could control how I saw myself. And I was done making myself smaller. I was done accepting Princess as the price of admission. I put in for a reassignment to a joint command position at Fleet Operations. A leadership role. Miller just smiled. About time. When the promotion boards opened, I submitted my record. No special endorsements, just the unvarnished facts of my service history. The request for reassignment would bypass Admiral Cole entirely, going straight to the regional command. 2 weeks later, Cole called me into his office. The swagger was gone. He looked tired. You requested a transfer, he said. Yes, sir. You think you can lead SEALs? He asked, his voice quiet. I don't know, sir. But I know I can coordinate their aviation support better than anyone else you've got. You think they'll follow you? I met his gaze. They already did. He looked down at my service jacket, which I suspect he was reading thoroughly for the first time. Hellman Ridge, he said softly. You brought out Team 9. Yes, sir. I lost 2 men in a similar op, he admitted. Johnson and Peters. I spent years blaming the pilot, thinking if we just had someone tougher, my men would have come home. Maybe, I said. Or maybe that pilot did everything humanly possible, and it still wasn't enough. Missions fail, sir. Not because of incompetence, but because sometimes the odds are just impossible. He was quiet for a long time. I tried to block your transfer, he confessed. But when the review committee saw Reaper 0 on your record, doors opened that I couldn't close. I got a reprimand. Conduct unbecoming. My boss explained in detail how badly I'd screwed up. He wasn't wrong. He finally stood and came around the desk. I let my own grief and frustration turn into resentment. I took it out on you because you were good at the very thing that had failed me. That was wrong. You deserved better. It was the most honest I had ever heard him be. You called me princess in front of 40 officers, I said quietly. You made me a joke. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it. But I can promise it won't happen again. Not from me, and not from anyone in my command. My transfer was approved. Within 60 days, I was reassigned to Fleet Operations, coordinating aviation support for all East Coast Special Operations units. It was a promotion in responsibility, if not yet in rank. You earned it despite me, not because of me, Cole had said as I left his office. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but a sense of resolution. Cole kept his post, but his reputation was tarnished. Maybe accountability didn't always have to mean destruction. Sometimes it just meant consequences and a chance to do better. As I walked across the base that day, I passed junior officers who now straightened up and nodded respectfully. My new position would come with more authority, more pressure and more scrutiny. But it was also a chance to ensure that the next young pilot wouldn't have to earn their respect with a dramatic reveal. They would be judged on their work from day one. That thought carried me forward. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making the system just a little bit fairer than it had been for me. Command was a different kind of challenge. I was now in charge of coordinating air support for SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and Army Special Forces. Some of the ground commanders still hesitated when I gave an order, that subtle pause that said they were second-guessing a woman's authority. I learned to address it head-on. Problem with the flight plan, Captain? I'd ask, my voice neutral. The hesitation usually vanished. Within 6 months, I coordinated 2 high-risk extractions that other commands had deemed impossible. The call sign Reaper Zero stopped being a ghost story and became a standard of excellence. My mission plans were studied in training scenarios. The legend that was once anonymous was now attached to my name, bringing a credibility that opened doors. But with that visibility came a new level of scrutiny. A mistake made by a male commander was a lesson learned. A similar mistake by me was a question of my fitness for command. I made it a point to mentor younger officers, especially a sharp young pilot named Ensign Harper. She reminded me of myself, working twice as hard and silently swallowing disrespect. After I saw a senior officer dismiss her in a meeting, I pulled her aside. "You don't have to accept that," I told her. "But if I make waves, they'll think I'm difficult," she said. "If you stay silent, they'll think disrespect is acceptable," I replied. "You shouldn't need a dramatic reveal to get basic respect." I saw a new determination in her eyes. A few weeks later, she formally reported the officer for unprofessional conduct. The complaint was upheld. It was a small victory, but it was progress. Leadership wasn't just about missions, it was about shaping the culture. Months later, I saw Cole at a Navy gala in Washington. He approached me looking older and humbled. The swagger was gone. "I didn't know," he began. "If you had, you would have treated me differently," I finished. "That's the point." He told me about the men he'd lost, how their deaths had colored his judgment, and how he resented my success because it reminded him of his failure. When it turned out to be a woman, he admitted, it just confirmed all my biases. He told me he was retiring. "I'm tired of fighting the wrong battles," he said. "For what it's worth, Kane, you're exactly what this community needs. Someone who leads with competence instead of ego." He extended his hand, and after a moment I shook it. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement that people can change. Years later, I stood on a stage at the Pentagon as my promotion to captain was announced. In the audience, I saw my parents and old colleagues like Chief Miller. I also spotted a retired Admiral Cole, in civilian clothes, watching from the back. He gave me a respectful nod. As they pinned the new insignia to my collar, I didn't think about that briefing room. I thought about the missions, the pilots I'd trained, and the operators whose lives I'd been trusted with. I thought about Ensign Harper, now a lieutenant, commanding with the confidence she deserved. After the ceremony, she introduced me to a group of new pilots. They had studied my Hellman Ridge mission in their tactical courses. "The technology makes things easier," I told them, "but you can't rely on it. When it fails, you fly by your training. Training repeated until it's automatic. That's what saves you when everything goes wrong." As the reception wound down, my father found me. "You know what I'm proudest of?" he asked. "Not the rank. I'm proud that you changed things. You made it easier for the people coming after you. That's real leadership." The call sign Reaper Zero was a promise I made one night in a storm, and a promise I kept for my entire career. It was a promise to show up, to execute, and to bring people home. And every time I hear it, I remember that the quietest soldier in the room is often the one you should never, ever underestimate.